Okay, I got this for 2140. Keith Parkinson, 1994 fantasy art card set, a full set. The first card we have here is a beautiful young lady and an obedient dragon. The Druid Stone. This was a fun painting to do. It incorporates many elements I enjoy painting. Usually there are some constraints, whether it's a story, game, or magazine article. In this case, there weren't any. Fatty of the dragon. Most people missed the coyote under the dragon's foot. I put that into show scale. When you think about it, dragons and rocks can be any size, but coyotes only come in one size. Wow, look at that reflection. This is a really amazing work. There's a sorcery wolf, and the trees look so real. Arcane summons. I had the publisher ask me how elaborate my modeling setup was on this project. They thought that I had set up skeletons in costumes, then went down and photographed them. Actually, they're all made up and there was no reference shot for any of it. Ordinarily, I like to shoot as much reference as possible. Very nice. Looks like there's battle going on. The grass looks so realistic. Charlemagne's champion armor aficionados have commented more than once that with armor like the horse is wearing, it would be very difficult to wear up. I thought about that. Too bad I like the way it looked. It stayed. Yeah, that armor looks like it would weigh like 100 pounds. Ooh, looks like a wing-tailed lemur, a tiger, and some wolverines. It's like maybe in the south part of Africa, near like Madagascar. Sundawa. This was a nice departure from the book cover format, which traditionally requires a good deal of dead space on the upper portion of the painting to accommodate type. Frequently, the composition is compromised to accommodate the type. In this case, I had no limitations and used the waterfall as a strong compositional element. Wow, look at this guy's artwork. Look at this lizard. His friend doesn't look like he's okay, but he seems pretty relaxed fighting this lizard monster thing. Return of the Banished. This was the second in the Elenium series. There are 3 things pictured that have returned that were once banished. First and most prominent is the monster. He's just risen from the dead. Second, Sparhawk himself. And thirdly, the spirit that Sparhawk carries is an artifact that was once banished as well. The gift. I had an idea for a type layout which in itself is fairly unusual. I thought it would be interesting to run the type up the side of the book instead of across the top. I showed the art director my sketch and told her about my idea. She was very receptive and thought it would make a great cover. This was one of the few times I had a hand in designing type placement. Ooh, it looks like the dwarves and the dragon are friends with each other in this picture. The ice dragon. Either that's a fairy cry dragon or the dwarves are deaf. They think they're gonna get away with the treasure. Sure they will. Maybe it's just a Kodak moment. I don't know. Oh, guess I was wrong about that one. Wyvern Rider. A nice palace. Dragon Wing. This painting was broken not so neatly in half. Somewhere along the way to the publisher, it was sent back for me to repair. It had originally been painted on masonite, which I now glued to a piece of 3x4 plywood. I made the repairs and sent it back. When the art director got it, she couldn't lift it out of the box. It weighed 70 pounds, but it was in one piece again. Masonite's a type of man-made wood. Oh wow, I can't tell if this is a girl or a guy, but it looks like she's about to get her head chopped off. I hope not. That definitely looks like a bad guy though. Dark Walker on Moonshade. This is another one of those paintings from my gray period, or so my wife calls it. The color schemes that I use, a subdued palette, remain my favorites. Usually I would do a painting like this in oils, but this one is acrylic wash painted transparently on a whiteboard. This ghost looks kind of menacing in this picture. Evgeny. This is the third in the series of books written by C.J. Cherrier that dealt with Russian folktales, ghostly possession, and magic. I love painting old gnarled trees, and this seemed the perfect setting to reflect the twisted natures of my subjects in the painting. These looks like warriors riding in the snow. Orcs in the snow. The background for this painting is from my favorite hiking spot in Wisconsin. The subject in this painting are covered head to foot in clothing and gear. It's cold out there. I would be cold too if it were me. A lot of fantasy art is based on showing a lot of skin and muscles. My approach is usually a little different. Looks like a warrior lady fighting some wolves. White wolves. The key to this picture is showing motion in the wolves. I tried to create a movement rhythm with the elongated wolf's tail and kicked up snow in the foreground, and the horse and the rider leading back into the same curve created by the wolf. Looks like some weary travelers and a ghost. Was Solka? This is the first of a series of 3 books set in an oppressive, drizzly, overcast world. I used very little color in any of the paintings, but overall these color schemes are some of my favorites. I think that was one reason the book stood out on the shelf. Most books are very brightly colored. Looks like a warrior and a girl with some wolves. Wolf King creating a sense of motion was the most important aspect of this illustration. I spent almost as much time working out the composition as I did working on the final piece. Looks like a guy laying on a stone, maybe he's dead, and an owl on the ground there. Trinifog, I view this as one of my best paintings. The entire story revolved around the heart of the man pictured lying on the stone. The visual elements of the picture all lead the viewer's eye to the man's heart. If you look closely, even the logs in the foreground, while they create a rhythm leading up to the tree, also point directly to the man's heart. This looks like marble stone with a guy with dual wielding and the dragon and then a bigger guy. Door to another dimension. When I initially conceived the first book cover, I thought it would work very well, and the type designers cooperated by designing type that followed the strong diagonals I had created in the illustration. I did not realize at that point that this was a book series with the same type layout on all of the books for continuity. Looks like a fight's about to happen here. The shining ones, the text on the back of this book should have read "Menace failed in mist," followed by a couple of descriptive paragraphs. Instead, some clever person in typesetting had changed it to read "Menace failed in spit." We were all very amused, except for the people who had to pay for the print one. Random House, I wonder where that typesetter works now. This looks like a Grim Reaper taking a bunch of spirits away, it seems. Scions of Sanawa, blowing capes, always present a real challenge to draw realistically. Fortunately, I had a friend with a wind machine and access to a model who didn't mind standing in a 60-mile-per-hour wind. Playing with the wind machine was almost as fun as painting the picture. A very dark place indeed. Temple of Elemental Evil. This piece was unusual in the fact that there are no live figures. The stone gargoyles on the building and on the outer gate are substituted. I always envisioned adventurers walking through the gates and of course the gargoyles coming to life and attacking them. A weird white yeti creature with like a couple shamans. The bagpiper. I needed to find a set of bagpipes and someone who knew how to at least hold them. After much detective work, I found a fellow at a military school that not only had a set but knew how to play them. I brought him into the studio to play the bagpipes for me. I had no idea how loud they were. After about 15 seconds, I asked him if he could just pretend to play them. That's a very cool looking dragon in a futuristic world or planet. The first pass, this painting was a bit of a challenge. I have my own interpretation of what dragons should look like. Unfortunately, these views do not always match the text of the book. This sometimes happens, and the only thing you can really do is bite the bullet and paint it their way. It looks like some dwarves and a creature with a beak. The Fall Gate. This is the first in a series of paintings I have planned. This one is a gate to a mythical land of imagination and memories. Watch those little guys. They'll steer you blind. This painting measures 9 by 12. Looks like a green dragon accompanied by some travelers. Dragon Rock. The inspiration for this picture, in addition to the book manuscript, was a fishing trip I took to northern Minnesota. While I was there, I didn't see any dragons. Come to think of it, I didn't see many fish either. Oh well, the scenery was beautiful. Looks like a raging war. Zulu War. When I started this illustration, I knew nothing about Zulu history or custom. Obviously, I had to do some research to do this illustration and found it very interesting. While learning a great deal in the process, this often happens when you get an assignment to illustrate something you know nothing about. Looks like an entryway to a city in a future that's floating. The marketplace. This was an interesting picture to lay out. The tarps were used as a compositional element to draw the viewer's eyes down into the scene. This had the potential to be a very busy street scene with the use of shadow and the tarps. The viewer's eye is taken where I wanted it to go, to the subjects under the arch. Looks like a warship with a bunch of sailors. I'm guessing the crew. The Russian Navy, one of the few non-fantasy pieces in this card set. This was the cover for a military history magazine that attempted to show the differences differences and similarities between the Russian Navy of the present and of the past. A blacksmith and drawer, forging of the dragon lance. This is really a study of warm and cool colors and how you can use them together to push and pull objects backwards and forwards in space. The blacksmith, you notice, has a chrome right arm, an interesting addition in this fantasy setting. Looks like some drawers. The big stash, people always ask me, are they putting it in or are they taking it out? And I always ask, what do you think? Invariably, people say taking it out. Drawers would never leave treasure behind, would they? I wonder if they discovered a new blacksmithing technique. Song of the Drawers. I had just finished a night course in blacksmithing before I painted this picture, so I was familiar with the tools needed and the procedure for actually doing blacksmithing. So while this is a fantasy piece, it is realistic with respect to the environment. This looks like some huntsmen, and there looks like two creatures on this fantastical tree. Return to Eden. This was an interesting project type, ran across the middle of the illustration. With that in mind, the middle of the illustration was left dark so the type would stand out. By itself, it's lacking, but as a book cover with the type included, it's a successful piece. Ooh, that's a pretty landscape picture. Realm of the King. This cover needs to have the feeling that it was a doorway into a mythical fantasy realm, magical and inviting. When I finished the illustration, it was lacking something. A friend of mine pointed out that while it was a beautiful landscape, there was nothing alive. That was it. I added birds to the sky and that brought the painting to life. The words on that book is like glowing. The Wizard's Study, a collection of short stories that had one connecting thread. The old man telling the stories appeared in all of them. I needed to connect the stories with the illustration. All of the books stacked around him bear the titles of the stories inside the actual collection, giving the impression that he has written them all magically. It's like a glowing sword, and they look like elves, kind of. Engulf the Man. I painted this picture a long time ago. In looking at the figure, that's easy to tell. I like to think that my figure work has improved from this point. However, the color scheme still holds up. Some drawers. The Earth Lords, the publishers, wanted something that looked like hobbits for this piece, but not hobbits. It was thought that this would sell the book. I wasn't wild about that idea because after reading the book, I thought it was a good book and it should have its own cover based on the contents. I liked the painting, woodland scenes, so I had fun with this cover anyways. Looks like a Grim Reaper on a lizard creature coming for a man. Talismans of Sonara. I've always wanted to paint the incarnation of death. This was my chance. He's not riding Death's typical mount, but I found it a refreshing change. Looks like a very grotesque creature and a lady wizard. Elf Queen of Sonara. This was a challenging painting because the type came down so low on the cover. To keep the figures from being tiny, I put them knee deep in a swamp to cut down on the vertical height. Really large panther on the background and a lovely maiden. Dawn Song. I had to pay pretty close attention to the value control in this painting to make sure the subjects and the background elements didn't fight with each other. That man looks like he's gravely wounded. And a lovely maiden. Druid of Sonara. Years ago, I had a studio in Wisconsin. The setting for this painting actually exists. It was just across the street and down a path. It remains one of my favorite patches of woods to this day. There are a lot of crows in this picture and another secretive lady. The birds. I've always liked painting animals and I've painted my fair share of birds. Granted, it's unusual. Either hawks or falcons. Crows do tend to crop up a lot with wizards, but after this painting, I have no great desire to paint more crows. Looks like a slave and a slave master, even though the slave is kind of attractive actually. Atlantis. This painting uses a mixture of science fiction and fantasy. I enjoy the mixture because there really are no limitations with what you can do. I like combining textures as well, polished, high-tech chrome, and mist-dampened marble and cloth. Ooh, she has a little dragon and really big eyes for her face. Faucia, she's a half-elf, she's a magic user, she's got great big eyes, she's got a pseudo dragon familiar and a fast horse. What more could a girl want? Oh yeah, jewelry. Looks like a pair fighting a ghostly dog. Wolf in the pot. The wolf's not really coming out of the pot, but it looks that way. The girl in the foreground is actually conjuring magic to fend this wolf creature off. If you look closely, you will see two small black pots emitting the same color magic that's coming falling off the girl's hand as part of her spell components. Elegant nymph fighting a dolphin. Dolphin dreams. The model thought I was nuts. There she was, sitting backwards on an exercise bicycle, which itself was sitting in a kiddie pool in my basement. To add insult to injury, not only did she have to balance there in this ridiculous pose, but I was constantly shooting her with water so she stayed wet under the lights. Reset modeling was easy. Looks like a queen encased in glass and a knight. The Diamond Throne. This assignment was a big break for me professionally. It was my first assignment from Valentine Books and my first hardbook novel cover. Unfortunately, I only had 5 days to do the finished illustration, which was half the time that I was accustomed to. I was painting right up to 15 minutes before the Federal Express truck arrived to pick up the painting. A fiery red dragon in a CPU component. Acrylics on illustration board. This was an assignment given to me by a computer software company. They obviously wanted to tie fantasy to computers. While I supposed you couldn't call my approach subtle, it does make the connection. Ghostly monster human. Sapphire Rose. This piece was a compositional nightmare. I worked for 2.5 days just getting the composition set. I wanted to draw the viewer into Sparhawk, the knight in the center, as the story revolves around him. Through the use of strong diagonal lines and value control, he remains the center of interest. Looks like 2 dragons fighting. Brains flambe. I've always enjoyed painting dragons, and I wanted to show just how violent the confrontation between 2 of them could be. I don't know what would hurt more, getting your brains boiled or your throat ripped out. Looks like some warriors fighting a dual-wielding soldier. Lost Prince. This was a fun illustration because it gave me the chance to paint some ornate armor, which I truly enjoy doing on some really evil characters. Looks like a flying castle, people running away. The flying citadel. If you look closely at the platforms on the citadel, on one of them you will find a police box with a small metallic dog and a guy with a big long scarf standing next to it. For any Doctor Who fans, this may be somewhat familiar. Actually, this was the first of 2 appearances in Dragonlance paintings for that particular police box. Looks like pub or business warehouse doing business. The Scam. This was a real seedy location full of seedy characters stealing seedy deals. Perhaps the seediest character of all is the white-haired fellow in the gray overcoat. This was my dad's glorious debut as model extraordinaire. Doesn't he make a great crook? Looks like a mech warrior on steed. The ultimate ATV. Just recently, it was interesting to see this painting interpreted into a 3-dimensional image. A miniatures company has done a lead figurine of it. I was amazed at the detail and accuracy of the sculpture. It was nice to see one of my 2-dimensional images brought to life. Looks like a native woman on a dinosaur. Kalea. This was kind of a small painting that I had a lot of fun with because of the loose background. Figuratively speaking, of course, I also usually like painting reptiles, so this was a good combination for me. Looks like a super weird alien spider organization octopus thing. Queen of the Spiders. I originally had the idea of putting the hands of the fellow on the left of the painting in Spock's "Live Long Prosper" sign, but decided it would be inappropriate for a mind flayer, considering they'd just as soon suck your brains out as look at you. Ooh, a funnier picture here of a little thing with a gun shooting someone, pointing something at someone. Bill the Galactic Hero. I've never read a book quite like this before. It was really silly but fun, and I wanted to get this across in the illustration. You know, to make everything bigger than life, so to speak. This kind of approach reminds me of the old Mad magazines I used to read when I was a kid. Super interesting technological setting. Evolution. I call this one Evolution because of the process it took to arrive at the finished product. This painting started out as daytime interior scene with big windows, stained glass, hanging flowers, and cathedral ceilings. Then was changed to an interior scene with computer screens, fluorescent lights, and less flowers. The final version is an outdoor night scene. Dragon and dogs fighting each other in armor. Dogs of the Future. I wanted to do an action piece for this cover, but the difference in scale between dogs and dragons is tremendous. It was a trick fitting them into the same frame without making the dogs microscopic. Looks like a couple spy mission shooting people. The Ambushers. This subject matter is is a little different from what I customarily get assigned. I got the chance to paint street punks with big guns with a tree. But seriously, I did enjoy the different textures that the wet cement, different fabrics, and atmosphere contributed to the piece. Super Mech Warrior, armed to the teeth. This piece was done in acrylics, the medium I usually reserve for doing hardware. This is one of the paintings I've done with a real high gloss. Chrome plated central figure. This was the cover to a weapons catalog. Looked like a space fight going on here. Tentacle thing from Dimension X. Well, they don't live happily ever after. The monkey men in spacesuits get sucked down into a dimension vortex and eaten by a great slobbery monster. This was a mixed media piece. I started off with acrylics and put the finishing slime on with oils. Looks like an operator in a cockpit. Prince of Mercenaries. I think someone flying a spaceship may have been done at least once before. I wanted to put a new spin on it, so I resorted to an old comic book trick of forcing the perspective. This painting was done in acrylics at Warp 9. Minions of Splurgoth. Not only did I do the painting for this role-playing game, I actually wrote up stats and abilities for the Splurgoth race. It was neat because it ended up being a significant contribution to the particular product. Looks like a battle going on and the lady is in a drone. I feel like that's not a very good spot in a battlefield though. Judson's Eden. This piece was done in acrylics and I actually used an airbrush. Something I don't do often anymore. I paint in oils almost exclusively, except when I do a science fiction piece with lots of hardware. The movement of the composition was key in this picture. As a painting, it works fairly well. Looks like Rapunzel. Sure, it's a fairy tale, but I always wondered how Rapunzel kept all that hair from turning into a giant rat's nest. The publisher did not like the idea of putting lint in her hair, so much for realism. A beautiful flying ship. The water world. My initial concept for this painting was quite different from how the painting turned out. The publisher made some significant changes in my composition, most of which I did not agree with. It is then necessary to do a professional job even though your heart is not in it. That's part of the territory when working as an illustrator. Looks like people coming to shore. Voyage of the Fox Rider. This is the second in a series of books. One of the main cover elements has been to show all the characters on the cover. In the first illustration, I had all the characters coming down steps so I could fit them in the painting. In this one, I had to figure out a new way to fit them all in. The boats being an important story element seemed like a natural to use for this purpose. Looks like an old lady monster. Miss Mayhem. This was a painting done for a Santh calendar interior. I spent a long time thinking of all the various puns that crop up throughout this illustration. I think my favorite part though is the fact that she is really making a fashion statement with her new hat. It looks like a pretty ornate arch. Kinda disproportionate though. The hidden path. There's a rule of composition that says not to put something exactly in the middle of a picture. Obviously there's a tree in the middle of this one. This was a design element added for the spine of this wraparound book cover. This painting was done in a series of transparent oil washes, very different from my usual opaque approach. This kind of looks like Snow White and her drawers. Snow White. This painting was a challenge for a number of reasons. The foremost being the round format. It was designed to be used on a collector's plate, trying to picture each individual dwarf with his own individual tendencies and making him come off as either sleepy or grumpy turned out to be the biggest challenge. Looks like an army of zombies, skeleton soldiers. Lord Soth's charge. In reading the Dragonlance novels, Lord Soth stood out as a powerful character. Having the chance to illustrate him for the first time was a real treat. I wanted to show him and his assistants in an epic type pose. Fortunately, I had the center spread of the calendar to accommodate a wide horizontal view. Looks like a lady in her underwear and a little person. Bria Brassy. This illustration was done for a Santh calendar. Anybody that's familiar with Santh will know that it's full of puns. So is this illustration. Look carefully and you should be able to find some box elder, someone not standing on a soapbox, and a whole variety of clever little things. Looks like some reptilian warriors. What do you mean we're lost? I always thought that monsters lose for a reason. No sense of direction may be a contributing factor. At any rate, I wanted to show a little interaction between these draconians in terms the viewer would understand. Body language. A really interesting, very stiff character in the center here. Ars Magica. When I started this painting, I didn't know what a mule looked like. I thought mules and donkeys were the same. They're not. I went to farms and took pictures of what I thought were mules, only to find out from the art director later that they were donkeys. Looks like a very fantastical castle there in the middle. Citadel of Light. The road in this picture is something I dreamed up and surprised the art director with. I didn't have it on the rough. Ordinarily, I don't give art directors too many surprises, at least not on purpose. But this time I thought it would make a much better painting, so I went ahead with it. Fortunately, the art director loved it, so I didn't have to change it. This looks like a very dark painting. Bristling wood. In this illustration, the horseback rider on the right is telling an old legend and it's coming to life in the background. I enjoy designing architecture, so this painting was a treat. This kind of looks like a scene from like The Evil Dead or something. The vampires of Lake Geneva. I fashioned the tombstones in this illustration after some of the stones that I found in a cemetery near where I was living at the time. Lake Geneva in Wisconsin. It was a very small town, but interestingly enough, the graveyard had some of the most elaborate tombstones I have ever seen, and there were even a small mausoleums. Looks like a dragon attacking a caravan. King's Gold. This painting tells a story about humans who didn't pay the toll, but they're about to. The name of this painting is King's Gold. However, if I do a sequel to this, I think the gold won't belong to the king anymore. Looks like a very peaceful, misty area. Reading the Dawn. In the initial version of this painting, the castle was not sitting on a hill, but loomed large in back of the retreating characters. The editor wanted to show the uphill struggle the characters would face in the novel, so symbolically, having their goal on top of a hill would get this across to the viewer. That was the thinking anyway. Kinda looks like a rush in the hidden city. The subjects in this painting are secondary upon first viewing it, so I had to make sure that the landscape surrounding them was as interesting and realistic as possible. In that it was a night scene, my palette was very limited and lighting had to be somewhat subtle. Looks like a ghost dragon this time. Hand of Chaos. Painting the dragon in this piece was a bigger challenge than I expected it to be. Anyone who has seen the original can see that the dragon is anything but white as it appears to be in the printed versions. I used just about every color of the rainbow in the shading and highlighting and white to give it that magical effect. Looks like a lone warrior and his steed. North Watch. A ranger's life is a lonely one. I always pictured solitary figures carrying out their duties with grim resolution. I tried to get that across in this illustration. I pictured a small town off in the distance that doesn't even realize he's out there watching its borders. It looks like a maiden and her Parkinson, maybe. Desert Rings. I suppose that while she makes a fashion statement, it's not the most practical of desert attire. But hey, whatever happened to artistic license anyway? And besides, didn't I hear somewhere that it's better to look good than to feel good? Looks like a bunch of people fighting some mummies. Tomb of the Dead. I had never painted an Egyptian scene before, so this was a nice departure. I had, however, painted the undead before. I had a lot of fun playing with the angles created by the slabs of stone and the way light bounces off them to light the figures. A very red cavern with a drake of sorts. Fire Sea. I've always loved to go through caves, but I've never really had the chance to paint many of them. The original sketch had a dog in it, which I was going to have jumping over the lava in front of the dragon. It became a real question as to whether to leave it in or take it out. The publisher wanted it out, the author wanted it in. You can see who prevailed. Weird alien creatures and carriers. The Sentries. This painting has always been affectionately known as the trash can dogs. This was one of my first experimentations with biomechanical creatures. I thought combining the power of technology, radar, infrared, etc. with the olfactory sensors of canines would make an awfully good guard for the average evil techno wizard's castle. A bunch of infiltrators in an orc castle. Eye of the Hunter. This was a wraparound cover for a novel. I wanted to show the antagonists and protagonists on the cover. That means a lot of figures to fit them in. I had to use a staircase to stack them vertically. I also wanted the cover to tell a story. This is a classic adventure tale and I wanted that to be communicated through the cover illustration. A broken down ruined castle. Time of exile. Decrepit castles have always held a fascination for me. This was a chance to put one on a book cover. There's no telling what could be living inside had that castle, a place I'd really like to go and explore in the daytime. A patient looking dragon, actually. Dragon cave, a black dragon in a dark cave. That was the assignment. I cheated a little. I poked a hole in the roof. This dragon was supposed to look female without resorting to the obvious. I had to get this across. I endeavored to make her build more delicate and give her frilly appendages on her head. How sexist. It doesn't matter, it didn't work anyway. But lovely chickens. Return of Lancelot. Oddly enough, I had the most fun painting the chickens. Oh, cool. As it turns out, I needed some reference on chickens, and one of my neighbors is responsible for buying millions of these birds every year for a large poultry company. He took me out to a number of chicken houses where I saw thousands of chickens and took pictures of hundreds. Okay, now I'm gonna place these in the book. Okay, here we go in the book. Take a look at all these pictures once again. Tell me which one's your favorite artwork, or if you read any of these books before. Lots of fantastic paintings, honestly. I'm really starting to really like these fantasy art cards because they look so pretty in the book. Now, I do like how this actually separates the portrait and the landscape. Very smart. Very, very smart. I wish more sets did that, honestly. Because how else are people gonna store them, honestly? I've never heard of most of these books described in the cards. So if you have, tell us about those books that you recommend reading or no. And then the checklist card. The cards look fairly well in a binder setting. So thank you. Bye.